Welcome to Productive Joy with Dr. Christy, where fun meets action.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Productive Joy. I am so excited for today's guest. Like always, I am running into really brilliant people who have such cool things to share, and Dan is absolutely no exception to that rule. And we're going to get started on him in a second, but before we do, I need you to follow this podcast. If you are not already following, you don't get alerts that say that there's something new and exciting to watch. So make sure that you are following and you are sharing so that other people can enjoy the fun as well. Speaking of fun, the song that is at the beginning and the end of this bad boy is by my father, who just had his 87th birthday and is just proud as can be of all the great things that he's done in his life too. So I would love for you to give him a shout out. His name is Mickey Finn. And much more importantly for today, I have a friend with me. This is Dan Doerksen, and Dan is a couple things. He's a psychological safety guru. He is a speaker. He is a person who makes great workplaces, which is fun. He's also an aspiring F1 race car driver, and his wife has hooked him up with an opportunity to go-kart race like in a league, which sounds pretty great. He's the father of twin boys and has a beautiful daughter. And by trade, he's an organizational developer and designer. Dan, welcome to Productive Joy.
Christy, it's fantastic to be here. I'm thrilled that you included me in your list of brilliant people. So I'm already feeling great. Yeah.
You are a brilliant human, and I have had a lot of fun getting to know you. So I think it's been maybe even 2 years ago that we met taking a psychological safety class together.
Yes.
At least.
Yes.
And we learned a little bit about each other then. And then you called and said, you know what, let's continue this relationship and learn a little something coaching wise. And that was a lot of fun. But you've had a pretty cool journey. So here's the thing I know to be true. People are finicky. They don't always listen for very long. And so you get about 30 seconds to hook them and tell them that they really, really want to listen. What would you say to people to convince them that this is an episode they can't miss?
Most people in the world, certainly in Canada, think work sucks. And I don't think that's okay. So if you want to learn about how to not make work suck and what connects to that, stick around.
Oh my gosh. And can you tell why we're friends? So you're speaking my language, buddy, because if you don't make work fun, people quit. And it doesn't have to suck. It can be actually pretty fantastic. So how did you get here? That's not the kind of thing that when you're a little boy, you say, you know what I want to do? I want to make sure that work doesn't suck for other people. So how let's tell us your lineage. How'd you get here?
Mercy. I didn't even know this job existed when I was in high school. Nobody was pointing me in this direction at all. I was 17 years old and I thought I was going to be a pilot and then an architect and then a business owner. I was all over the map. And what I realized really early on, I was 17 years old and I started to like weed out all of these career paths based on like, this one's got a high divorce rate. This one's not good for family life. And it's like I'm 17 and I'm planning for whatever. Like, I don't even know that I was going to get married at that point. But what I learned about myself was I'm very values driven and I'm very purpose driven. So I need a job that feels like it really is doing something impactful in this world. And it has to align with my values and what I think is important. So I ended up going off to school and taking a degree in adolescent development. And of all things, just directing my attention towards teenagers. So I was 17 years old and I wanted to learn more about teenagers. That's my existential crisis. And so I did that. I worked in sort of community service, community programming, working with teenagers and figuring how do we improve the quality of life for a group of people that are in such a unique stage of development. You're not a child, you're not quite an adult, your brain is exploding, it's developing. There's such a need for a sense of identity and belonging there. And so I just wanted to walk alongside and influence and help direct people's trajectory in life. That was super meaningful. I did that for 8 years, working with volunteers and otherwise, and working directly with teenagers. And I think my brain just immediately wants to zoom out a little bit and say, what's the most influential thing in a teenager's life? And it took me a minute to figure this out, but it finally clicked that, oh, it's parents. I know they would never admit that. Teens don't admit that. We think, the locus shifts to friends, but it is parents. Research shows this over and over again, and I won't bore you with all the stats. It's parents. if you want to influence teenagers and improve their quality of life, I have to start focusing on parents. And so I started doing that. So I started kind of leaning out and focusing on parents, on marriages, on building communities of support around parents, and just focusing on a whole kind of family systems model. I started playing around with our organization structure to maximize for that. We changed our whole strategy as an organization. We messed around with all of that. And I realized that I really like that stuff. And I didn't even have a name for it at the time. But what I was realizing is I like organizational design. I like
Mm.
working with systems and processes and culture, all the things around people that influence how they experience life. And so I went back to school, got a grad degree in organizational leadership, and then zoomed out one more time and said, what's the thing that influences parents more than just about anything else? It's work.
Mhm.
We spend half our waking life at work, and it accounts for and is typically regarded as one of the top, if not, top three, if not the top one major factor in our sense of life satisfaction, mental health, and well-being is our quality of experience at work. And so it's like,
Wow.
let's focus there. So now I've shifted from family to work, and I've been doing that for about 6 or 7 years, just trying to figure out how do we make work better so that absolutely teams can succeed, organizations will excel, but also people will thrive. And so that's been my fascination and curiosity for the last number of years. And I think it'll hold my attention for quite some time, unless I zoom out again and I don't know what, work with political systems, society. Who knows? Who knows where the future
Well,
will go?
I'm going to make an argument, Dan, that it's actually been your focus from the beginning because you said at 17, when you were thinking about a job, the jobs that you picked had to have a good quality of life attached to them. Low divorce rate, people had good family lives. I would venture a guess and say most of us did not even give that a consideration when we were trying to decide what we wanted to be when we grew up. So well done on you that you really your whole life have known you wanted to make this big thing called work just a little bit better. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, and I think each of us has our own unique story, right? So if I were to reflect on that a little bit more, my home life as a teen, it was a bit chaotic to put it
Mm,
lightly, right?
mhm.
It was a tense place to be. And I think and I wouldn't even have connected the dots back then, but if I were to have tracked like the emotional health or energy of our family in my childhood and teenage years, it would have really closely matched the trajectory of my dad's career. So we're
Oh,
single income, and it's sort of like when work is going really well, family's awesome. We're having fun. We're going to McDonald's. We're going to Disney World. We're happy and laughing. Oh, but when work was tough,
mm.
things got really tough at home, right? When your career isn't going well, I mean, that triggers depression, anxiety, panic attacks, all sorts of things can happen. And so I think I realized early on that like work, family, life connection is super important, right? And so I built on that over the years, but I think I learned that quite early.
Yeah, you did. And I think it's pretty miraculous that you figured out eventually, right, that you landed in a space where you're doing good in that space. You are making that space better for others. You're making work not suck. And you don't have a wand any more than I have a wand, but there are some things that you're probably doing specifically that helps work be better for people. So this podcast is meant for leaders who want to do it differently, who recognize that fun and work have to go together in order for success to happen because we quit things that aren't fun. So, what would be some advice that you would have for this group of leaders about how you make work the kind of place that people don't take out on their families when they get home, but instead take them to Disney World?
Yeah, that's the outcome that we're looking for.
Right. What else
Good
is there?
work equals Disney World. Yeah, let's just make
That's what
that
I've
very
heard.
clear on this episode. That's my promise to you today. So I think there's so much I could say. There's so many practical pieces. I just want to start with a mindset piece of work doesn't inherently suck.
Mm,
Okay, so as human beings in our kind of natural, thriving state, we will be productive. Human beings are not just recreational, leisurely beings. We enjoy being productive.
mm,
I know this because even my kids know this, right? So sometimes they'll resist a little bit, but just the other day they were cleaning out their rooms, and yeah, again, reluctant at first, but by the time they get into it, they start working at it for hours. And my like twin boys, 9 years old, they're like organizing their desks, and at the end of it, they're just beaming. And they're like, "Dad, come see what I did! Like this is amazing!" And they admitted to me like, "This feels really good. I like it when we do this." Right. And my daughter says that, and my kids say that. And I know that, right? There's so much work I do around my house, my project. I remember my first car, a 1977 Chevette. Okay, not a Corvette, a Chevette.
There
So
is a
only
difference. There
some
is a
people will know what
big
that is.
difference.
But I spent probably 20 to 30 hours buffing the yellow paint job on this Chevette, which I mean, the car, Christy. It's
I
not
do.
30 hours of buffing. It's
Uh,
not. I bought it for $500, but I put so much time and energy into it because I enjoyed the work. I
yeah.
was engaged, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we just need to remind ourselves that that's our natural state. Work is fun.
Mhm.
Work gives us a sense of accomplishment, satisfaction. It's all of these good things. And so the question isn't, work sucks, how to make it better. It's work is good. What made it suck? Right?
Oh,
And so let's flip the script a little bit and say what is drawing us away from what is naturally a source of satisfaction in our life? That's the question. And there's all sorts of things, right? And so, some are obvious: relationships at work. If there's tension in relationships, there's unresolved conflict, you don't get along with people, you don't feel like you've spent any time building friendships at work, yeah, that's not going to feed us, right? We're social beings. So that social world at work needs to be going well. But I want to focus on one thing. So if there isn't a magic wand, but if there was one thing that I were to tell leaders, HR departments, whatever it is, to focus on, uh, it would be this: managers.
mm,
Okay. There is nothing that influences work quite like the position of a manager. It's a huge responsibility, right? So Gallup will tell you that 70% of employee engagement ties directly back to a manager's knowledge, skills, and ability and practices, right? So if employees aren't engaged in their work, they're not committed, enthusiastic, all these things, we got to be looking at what is the manager doing or not doing, because
mm.
everything can rise and fall on that. I remember a story of it was a young adult that I was career coaching for a little bit. And he told me this story. And he wanted to go for coffee with me because he's like, I don't know what to do with my life. I want to get out of this job. You know how it is. It's like that
Yes.
quarter life crisis. You get to about 30 and it's like everything falls apart. And I said, wait a minute, you've been working at this job for 10 years. It must have been okay for a while. Like, tell me about that. And so he started telling me this story about how the job started kind of mediocre, just a regular job. It was in manufacturing. And he says, but then we got a new manager. And this team that was typically isolated, we all had our earbuds in, nobody talked to each other. We were kind of in the same space, but we didn't really work together. It's like he came out of his office and he worked with us. He came
Mm.
into the space with us, and it felt like, they're not just in their ivory tower there. They're actually a part of the team, partnering with us. This manager would it regularly involve them in decisions and conversations that are kind of above their pay grade, right? So he's consulting them, he's asking them for their opinions, and then he listened and actually did stuff with it. And this young adult was telling me, he's like, it was fantastic. He's like, I felt like we were on the same level. He didn't feel like my manager. He just felt like a team member. He's like, I would go home and I would talk about problems at work with my life or with my wife, and I would lie awake in bed at night thinking about these problems. And I'd come to work the next morning and pitch these solutions. I was like, hey, like I think of this, this, and this, and we should try this. And I was just like, that sounds fantastic. Like that is the image of an engaged employee that everybody wants. What happened? He said, well, the manager retired
Mm.
and we got a new manager,
Mm.
and they stay in their office. They don't interact with us much. They don't ask us a lot of questions. We just do our job. And as long as we're doing it well, then they'll be fine. But they'll also, when they talk to us, it'll usually be it'll be criticism, it'll be critiques and feedback and all that. And you could just tell as he shared this story that his engagement and joy had just fallen through the floor. I was like, all of that shifted with a manager.
Yep.
Right. And what kills me is this new manager, if I had asked him, like, what do you like if you were to rate this young adult on performance, your annual performance review, how do you think they're doing? Are they meeting expectations? Are they beyond? All those sorts of things. I bet this manager would have looked at this young person and said, like, they're average,
Mhm.
they're okay, they're not super engaged, and probably has no idea the potential of this person, right? That they were engaged. They could be so much more. You just haven't learned how to tap into it or create the environment that really draws that out of them. And I'll say this, I'm not here to throw managers under the bus. It's a hard job. Okay. It's a hard job. There's a lot of responsibility, a lot of expectations. 80% of managers get no training or onboarding whatsoever as they start. So they're
Ever.
hardly like, I actually don't fault managers for this at all. It's like you're not being set up for success. You don't even know how to set up other people for success. So it's a whole big systemic thing. And that's really, org design. How do we create an environment for managers to excel and embrace their responsibility opportunities so that they can do the same for others? And so there's so much there. So I would say, how do we train on board? How do we support
Mhm.
managers? How do we create very clear expectations? Do we know what a scorecard is for managers? Do we know what the best practices are for them? That's all super critical.
Well, and you just said a whole bunch of things.
I did,
All
yeah.
things.
You gotta stop me and just interrupt.
No, everything you said aligns completely with how I have seen things work in organizations and how I also approach this work, which is the creation of productive joy, right? So I started this podcast because my mantra has been for years, if you don't make work fun, people quit. And as I was thinking about what sort of podcast would I want to create, it's around what is productive joy? What does it mean to create to produce joy? Because joy I think is a choice and we cannot be joyful every minute of the day, but we can choose to find the good and we can choose to seek out the positive or the negative. It is an absolute choice. But what I heard you say in that very brilliant explanation what was a couple of things, and you use the word managers. I know the new HR catchphrase is people managers, right? So I am a people manager. That
Yes.
means that
Yep.
I manage humans, but I like to look at it as a leadership position and not a managerial position because I do think that there's a big difference between someone who manages people and someone who leads people. So a manager is somebody who, checks the box and gets the stuff done and sits in their office maybe and says, "Yep, I'm going to do this, this, this and this." But what you're describing in the first guy, the guy that retired, right? The one that inspired this young man to do amazing things was a leader. Somebody worth following,
Absolutely.
somebody who recognizes the value of this is who I am. This is who I'm going to be to you and I want you to be the best version of you because we're in this together. And I think that's the difference is that if we as organizational design geniuses like you are, right? If we can create leaders instead of managers, regardless of title, then all the other stuff kind of follows, right? So that's kind of what you do now, right? You're an organizational
It
designer.
is, yeah. So I work for an organization called the Achieve Center for Leadership. So leadership is absolutely at the core of kind of everything that we're doing and is, at the heart of creating a really healthy culture in workplaces. You have to align leadership and those with power decision making. Leadership and management gets confusing and is probably like a much longer
Oh,
conversation. Leadership ultimately is we're just talking about, I love how Marcus Buckingham put it. He often says leadership isn't really a thing. He's like, you're a leader if you look behind you and people are following.
right.
Simple as that, right? So a leader is someone who has the ability to cultivate influence and trust, and people want to move along with you in a shared kind of mutually beneficial direction. That's great. You absolutely need that, right? So if nobody wants to move with you in a certain direction at work, you might have a title, but you're not a leader,
Right.
right? So leadership isn't a title you can give anyone. It's a quality and it's an emergent property of a relationship that you have with other people. And so to that point, I agree with you. It's 100% right. Where it gets tricky is you can lead through interpersonal qualities, right?
Mm.
Being caring, being kind, respectful. Uh, but we can really create an environment of leadership and management. It kind of blurs the
Yeah.
lines. When we think about operating processes and workflows and how we share informations and how meetings are run and how often and who's invited and some of those like really tactical, gritty stuff feels like it belongs in the column of managers. But if you don't do that well, it all falls apart. So maybe here's a good example. Actually, I was kind of ranting about this on LinkedIn recently. It's like creating a psychologically safe team. That feels like a personal, interpersonal reality where you need a leader. That's true. But there's all of these things that you actually need a manager. You need to put your manager hat on to create psychological safety too, right? So a lack of role clarity will make it really hard to know if I'm the right person to be mentioning something, giving feedback. I could be like, am I overstepping? This is like, it feels really fuzzy. And so I'll just be quiet,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
That's a manager's role to help define expectations, roles, who has decision rights, what are the decision making processes. Because even something like decision rights, if people don't know where they have authority, they're not gonna feel like it's safe to speak up because it's like I don't really know if it's my place, right? And so we're kind of
Yeah.
always like, I don't know, should I not? And as soon as we're
And if
doing
I
that, I mean,
do,
I have a colleague that calls that stutter stepping. He says like as soon as we're stutter stepping, like that's too much. There's lack of clarity and indecision, and we'll probably just decide to stay quiet
mm,
instead, right?
mm,
Or, talk about information sharing systems. So if we're trying to create psychological safety in a team, if all of the ways that we share information and communicate are sort of these closed, private, need to know
right.
system, people don't have access to the information they need to make proper decisions, and they hesitate to speak up because it's like, well, I'm not in that inner circle, I don't have that information, it's not transparent, it doesn't feel equitable, I'm not included, all of those things. And you can go on and on. You can look at, how we compensate, incentivize people, how people get promoted, career advancement, performance management systems. We might talk about collaboration and teamwork, but if all of your performance management reviews are based on individual ratings, all your career pathing is individual versus collective, none of that creates the environment you want on your team, which is ultimately safe and productive. All of the things I just mentioned are like really non-glamorous managerial tasks.
You're right.
And so
You're
while we
right.
need strong leadership, like in the midst of all of that, you have to like not be a jerk, respect people, care about them, be vulnerable, model vulnerability, right? So you need all this like interpersonal leadership, build trust stuff. But then you also need this like these hard skills of management to like make a better system for
Yeah.
people to operate in. Because if you don't get that right, all of your good intentions will not create the impact that you want. And so
Yes.
it's, well, yeah, when you say leadership and management, I actually think both of those hats work together really well and should work together really well. And neither is better than the other.
Right.
One isn't, the hero and the other is the
Both are
villain.
right. Both are
We need,
necessary to create any sort of forward motion. And what I heard and what I really liked about what you said is, first of all, you can't negate the managerial pieces. You can't, right? Like, so I am a people manager, but if I'm not wearing both hats at different times and I don't have my leader hat on sometimes and my managerial hat on sometimes, then we're never going to make any progress because I can be very likable and not very executionable, right? Like I don't execute on things
right.
very well,
Yeah.
or I can execute on everything and nobody likes me. And either way is going to create systems that are broken. And we've got to be careful to provide both. So I want to rewind because when we first started talking, before we even hit record, you saw the alignment between productive joy and what you do. And I definitely see it too. But my favorite question to ask is if you had to define or describe productive joy, what is that definition to you?
How would I define productive joy? It's maybe a combination of what I've said. I think production is joyful. It's kind of rediscovering the joy that we're meant to have in sort of contributing meaningfully to people in the world around us.
Mm. Well, you said that earlier, right? Like, so you were
Yep.
talking about the mindset shift that work doesn't inherently suck, that it actually is good. And if work is good, then what made it bad? What made it shift? What made it
Yeah.
become something we dread doing? Is it the humans involved? Is it the things you're being asked to do by those humans? Is it not feeling valued and appreciated? Is it that it's no longer psychologically safe for you to make mistakes? It could be any combination of those things, right? But what I heard you say is that production is what's joyful. We're made to produce, we're made to create things. That's what our brains are wired to do.
And even if, and that's, and you know this, I'm sure you talk about this often, even if it doesn't feel fun in the moment,
Mhm.
right? I actually love doing home rental projects. I've got a history of I was in the trades for a little bit, so I've done all sorts. I know just enough to think I know more than I really do.
Ah, fair.
And so I love it. That's my like probably my biggest hobby is just tackling projects on my house. They're not always fun. I've been soundproofing walls recently in my basement and just like working with insulation around pipes and rafters and beams. That's not like in the moment if you're like, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much fun are you having? I'd be like, 2. This is terrible.
It smells, it's hot, I'm
Yeah.
itchy. Yeah.
Talk to me 1 hour later. And I'm like, that felt so good. I feel so good that I did that today because this is the impact it's going to have on, my kid's bedroom is now quieter and they're more separate from this. And it feels so meaningful. And I can look around and be like, this is what I've created. Creation, the act of creation is such a source of satisfaction, I think, to us as human beings and to see, but we often think of that as like, that's the side hobby,
Yeah.
right? That's my car, my house, my sport, my whatever it is. That's where I'm creating and we look at work as just like that's just like where I do this thing that other people tell me to do and I get a paycheck.
Mm.
It's like work is your creative outlet. That's your
Yeah.
productive outlet. So find a spot that lines up with what you love to do and what brings you joy, right? I think so often we settle.
Yeah.
It's like, well, whatever, work is work. It's kind of supposed to suck. So if work sucks, then that's par for the course. And I'm just gonna stick this out till retirement, even though that's 20 years away. Uh, and I'm just gonna like grit my teeth and bear it.
Yeah.
Uh, and I just think this is way too important for us to settle for work that is not meaningful and brings us joy.
Well, I think we need to take it all the way back to what you first started out with, which was at 17, you knew you wanted to have a job that was going to allow you to enjoy your family. And then you studied adolescence and you realized that was really fascinating and great, but it really wasn't up to them how they were going to end up. It was up to the parents who needed to have a part in this puzzle, right? And as you studied the parents, you realized it was even bigger than that. It was who's influencing them. What I hear overall is there's always an influence coming in, right? Like, regardless, whether I'm the adult in the equation and my work is influencing me, or I'm the teenager and my parents are influencing me, or I'm the infant and my family is influencing me, there's always influence. What we choose to hear from that influence is what's going to shape our future, right? So I use this analogy often. And so if you put your fingers together real tiny and look through that little bitty hole, that's your sphere of control, right? We do not have a big sphere of control, meaning we were born into the family we were born into. We live where we live. We did the things. We experienced the things. Here we are, right? This is our sphere of control. But our sphere of influence is as big as your arms will go out. We can't stop our sphere of influence. So it isn't that I can't change my circumstance. I just have to recognize that I'm influencing what's happening around me to make really great things. And I think that's what great managers and leaders do, is that they influence the space that they have influence over and they help people become the best versions of themselves in that space so that when they go home, they're good to their kids and they have something left in the tank to give, right? Like, so I'm trying to weave your words into a really pretty bow because I think what you're saying is so important for all of us to remember, which is regardless of what's influencing you, how are you going to let it affect you in life.
Yeah,
What are you going to do with that?
100%. You know, as much as I say managers have the greatest opportunity to make work better, just because of the power that they have in the systems that we've created. If you want to totally flatten hierarchy and remove bosses, which some organizations have around the world, then that totally changes the narrative. For most traditional hierarchical organizations, managers are your key influences for culture and experience. That is not to remove influence or responsibility from every employee, right? We, like you said, we all have the ability to regulate our emotions,
Yeah.
choose our mindsets and our attitudes. And honestly, every person, a culture of a team or a workplace is the collection of everyone's contribution, not just one.
Right.
Right. So if a team is toxic, the manager's likely involved in that scenario, but so is everybody else.
Yeah.
Right. And so I love it. Figure out what's within your sphere of influence at work.
Yeah.
Chances are you can bring a piece of what's missing, be that relationship or
100%. And
trust
that's
or
what happened
joy
to
or
your
laughter or, yeah.
Yeah, it's what happened to your sweet boy that you were talking about that came to you at 30 and said, "I don't wanna do this anymore." But he really did wanna do it when he and his team had influence over what was happening. He just kinda forgot he still did. And he needed that reminder that you know, you can't control other people, but you can influence them by saying, "Hey, I have an idea." Right? And what happens with that idea, of course, is gonna be up to that manager, you're right. But I have to bring it forward or they'll never know it existed, and he'll think I'm mediocre, right? He will make an assumption about me because I didn't step forward and say, "Actually, I have this really great idea, and I think you should listen."
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. And, some people use the term managing up. I think it's just there's reciprocal influence, right?
sure.
So a manager influences us, we influence them a great deal as well, right? So they're just human beings.
Yep.
Like I said, managers, just because they got the title doesn't mean they know what they're doing. Like,
And they don't
again,
wanna be
most of
bad
them
at their
haven't
job
been
either.
trained. Yeah, they're all really well-intentioned people. I have yet to find any evil managers in my line of work, and I've
Yeah,
worked with hundreds of them. They're well-intentioned people who are finding their way through, and they also need support
yeah,
from their teams, right? So it's easy to criticize managers, which just makes them feel even more isolated and eventually makes them worse at their job. So how do we support managers and yeah, and just see them as they're on our team. They're
yeah.
just another human being on our team. So we sometimes we put managers on pedestals and we isolate them, and I think that does everyone a disservice, right? Even and maybe you'll disagree with me here, but sometimes I hear, people say, well, it's like it's manager's job to care for people, not, it's not the other way around.
Mm,
And I just think managers are not parents, employees are not children, right? What something that could be true of your family scenario where it's like, it's not my kid's responsibility to care for me. That's true. They're children. I would never put that responsibility on them, right?
right.
That's not true in the workplace.
Mm-mm.
In the workplace, you're both adults, which means you both have a responsibility to support and care and be respectful and allow each other to be human and extend grace and all of these things. So I think, yeah, as much as I'm putting on managers, I do want to emphasize that they're human beings and they want to be part of a team and they need to be supported just like anybody else.
Well, and you said I could disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. I would just take the title off. I think it's our job as humans to care about other humans. And whether you
Perfect.
carry the title or not, you should want to take care of others. Now, do we all know? Do we like everybody? No. Is that normal? Sure. But in the workplace, I think that there should be an expectation that we take care of each other, that we treat each other like human beings. And chances are good if you're treating someone like a human, they're going to treat you like a human back. That's typically been my experience. I'm not saying that I haven't ever run into somebody who chose to be ugly to me. That does happen, but I don't let that steal my joy because why would I, right? So I could talk to you for weeks. I feel very sure. However, people won't listen for weeks. So I have to
Yep.
wrap a bow on this again. And I have some rapid fire questions. But before I ask the rapid fire questions, I want people to know how to find you. Dan, what would be the best way for somebody to get in touch with you if they wanted to ask some questions or say, hey, can you help our organization?
Yeah, honestly, probably the easiest is just search for me on LinkedIn. That's just my name, Dan Doerksen. It's on LinkedIn, or use my email address. It's dan@achievecenter.com. Now, it's going to confuse your audience because I'm a Canadian and we spell center CENTRE and not ER. So you're
Well, I was
probably
going to
going to
mention your
you're going to type that
Canadianness.
email wrong and it's not going to work.
That
So
would be
just use
terrible.
LinkedIn.
So center RE. And
Yeah.
you should probably spell Doerksen because that also could throw somebody off.
Yeah, so it's Doerksen. And I don't ask me why there's an O in there. I don't know, but pretend it's not there and you'll pronounce it right.
There's an O, so you can say out and about and all of the things, and
Yeah,
it would
that's
make
right.
sense,
Jokes. Yeah.
which has been perfect. Okay, so are you ready for these rapid fire questions?
I think so.
Oh my gosh, I know you're excited. Okay, so I have another definition for you. This one is personal. What is your definition of fun?
What is my definition of fun? I have to be laughing. There has to be humor involved. And there has to be people involved. I think being with people, doing things that I love, yeah, that's fun.
I love it. I
That's
love
good.
it. Well, and I don't know that everybody would say that there are humans involved in their fun. I think some introverted people would like to read a book by themselves, but you and I both would like there to be
Yeah.
humans involved. I like it. Okay, how do you know that you are showing up as your authentic self?
That's a good question. If I'm not smiling and cracking jokes and just taking things more lightheartedly, I find that I get overly serious if I'm feeling like I need to be someone. So it, it's got to be, yeah. And if I'm not joking around, then I probably don't feel safe enough to be my authentic self.
I like it. I like it. Well, and that's been my experience with you. Definitely like that lighthearted, like we're not going to take ourselves too seriously, and that's good. How do you channel your best self on your worst days?
Oh, those days are hard, right? Those days suck. Some days do suck, legitimately. I think for me, I just learned I have to accept it. It's not it doesn't make me bad. There's nothing wrong with me. The quicker I can just accept that this is how I'm feeling, and I don't necessarily know why, but kind of process and accept your emotions and to do so non-judgmentally, right? Sometimes I can really beat myself up over those things. Just say, today's a bad day. What can I do? Can I shift my schedule or tasks in a way that give myself new kind of goals or outcomes or focused priorities? Some days you don't have that luxury, but if you have the luxury, just accept it, figure out what you can do and celebrate what you can do. You're not going to fire it 100% every day,
No,
but
but
I
it sounds to me
expect
like
myself to.
well, and I think what you just said was exercise your sphere of influence, right? What about this can I change or rethink? All right, final question, and this is going to be tough because yeah, lots of smart things were said today, but people really will only remember one major idea from the last 30 minutes or so. So if they can only remember one thing from what we talked about, what's the one thing you really want them to walk away with today?
I want them to know that your work life matters. It's not pay attention to it, learn from it, understand what you need. It's your journey, it's within your sphere of influence, and for the most part, your sphere of control. If work isn't good enough for you, that's not good enough. It's way too large of an influence on your mental health, your well being, your overall sense of life satisfaction. Don't settle till retirement. And
Mm,
if you're a manager, different takeaway, just own your responsibility and the opportunity you have. Nobody has as much opportunity as you to create a great workplace for people. So just own it, embrace it, lean into that. You can do really good work
ugh.
in the position you're in.
Thank you, Dan. This was a true delight. Thank you for giving us your time. You didn't have to, but you chose to. And we're very appreciative that you were willing to share your brilliance. Thank you for what you do. You really are changing the world one manager at a time, one human at a time, and helping people have the right tools in their tool belt to make great things happen. So thank you for spending your time with us. And for all of our listeners, thank you for choosing to get better, for looking for productive joy, for creating productive joy, for recognizing that you don't have to keep doing it exactly the same way. It's okay to make change. And as always, I just want to remind you to figure out a way today to turn fun into action.